Hi everybody, welcome to a new episode of the Reinvent Money Show. My name is Paul Buitink. My guest today is Erik Voorhees. He's a well-known Bitcoin investor and also CEO of Shapeshift.io. Hi Erik.
Hey, how you doing?
And my co-host is Tim Pastoor of
Cool.
TwoWay.io. Hi Tim.
Hey.
So Erik, it's been half a year since we last spoke.
hmm
That was just when you decided to close Shapeshift for New York customers based on
Yeah,
BitLicense.
yeah.
So how have
Uh,
you been since?
Good. We got a lot of good publicity actually about that. I think a lot of people in the community liked what we did. Um, we essentially blocked New York before the actual bit license became law. So we tried to be very proactive and not just block New York, but explain to the world why we thought the bit license was so damaging and terrible. Um, so a lot of other companies also blocked New York, which is great. And we route all of our New York traffic to a website, pleaseprotectconsumers.org, where we explain why we thought that law was so bad.
Yeah, and I see on the website there's quite a few other companies that have joined Shapeshift in blocking your customers, right?
Yeah, and I wish more would. And of course, with something like the bit license, the real cost is not the companies that you see leave, but the companies that you never see because they never get started there because they need $100,000 in legal fees to start operating in New York. So the real tragedy is the unseen, all the damage that people will never know about because those things just couldn't happen.
Exactly. And was there any response from the regulators based on your action? Maybe they reached out and wanted to talk to you about your action?
No, well, um, what's his name? The head of the New York Department of Financial Services. He ended up quitting his job right after he unveiled the bit license, and
Losky.
yeah, Ben Losky. I guess his response was to quit and join the private market. So he basically crafted this horrendous piece of legislation, threw it upon the world, and then left. So everyone gets to deal with his mess forever now.
Right, yeah. But no other states have followed New York since.
No one has followed New York, and thankfully, I think that the public perception of the bit license in New York was negative enough that other states don't want to follow in that path. They see it as clearly something that was done poorly, and so a lot of states will regulate Bitcoin in various ways, but I think they all realize that the way that New York did it was really damaging and dangerous.
Yeah, so New York residents have been the sacrificial lambs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And Shapeshift. Tell us more about Shapeshift. I mean, you guys have been operating for quite some time now. I see Shapeshift buttons and everywhere on all sorts of sites and in wallets and you name it. So how's business?
Business is good. We're growing very fast. We're doing about 500% the volume we were doing at this time last year, so we've grown 5x. Um, just need to do that a few more times, and we'll be a pretty big company. So it's going well. I mean, I think a lot of companies are finding our API to be really useful, and because it's freely accessible and open to anyone, all sorts of people are integrating the API into their website for things, and they don't need to get our permission. They don't need to go through some lengthy, sign up process. It's just cryptocurrency exchange the way it should be, which is frictionless and instant and convenient and safe.
Excellent. And what are the most popular altcoins at the moment?
Um, Ethereum is big. I think a lot of people are excited about it. I know that there are a lot of financial institutions playing around with it. Um, I think Ethereum is probably the first. I'll call it an altcoin, but it's not really a good term for it. But the first alternative blockchain that is getting some institutional adoption, and a lot of that is just because it works differently enough from Bitcoin that it can do things differently than Bitcoin. It can do things that Bitcoin cannot, and so people are using it for those purposes. But ultimately, uh, I think anyone who's following the space sees a really uh, helpful and healthy bridge between those two platforms.
So what are the plans for the future for Shapeshift? You just talked a little bit about the API, about how secure, reliable it is, etc. But can you tell us maybe a little bit also about the backend, what the plans for the future are, and yeah, where it comes to decentralization, what applies to Shapeshift right now, and how it could be potentially further decentralized in the future?
Well, so we are not decentralized. We are a central company, um, but we achieve, I think, one of the important goals or purposes of decentralization, which is safety and not having funds stored with one party that can either through negligence or malice or outside theft compromise user funds. So with Shapeshift, it doesn't hold any customer money. So even though it's not decentralized, it can never have a Gox-like incident, which I think is a really important advancement for the industry. And we're currently working on our new website, which will be pretty exciting. It'll be released Q1 of this coming year. The first version of Shapeshift that we launched about 1.5 years ago was very simple. It was basically just a way to convert between Bitcoin and Litecoin, and since then we've added all sorts of features and lots of other coins. And we just kept sticking things onto the old website, and it's gotten a little complex and confusing now. So we're reimagining the whole thing to be something even more user friendly and fast.
Right.
So how many people work for Shapeshift, Eric?
7.
And how many are based in Switzerland?
Well, the company's based in Switzerland. Yeah. People are scattered around.
Right. There's no one actually physically working from a Switzerland office or anything.
There is.
There is.
Yeah. But we keep a lot of that info private. I think generally it's a good security idea for Bitcoin companies, to the extent that they can, to not reveal where they are, who works for them, or where those people are. Because due to social engineering, the more information an attacker has about those kind of things, the worse. And if you can build a service that is trustless by design, and that people don't need to trust Shapeshift in order to use it, because again, we don't hold customer money, that allows us to also operate with a certain degree of privacy for the business, which provides more safety and security because all that information doesn't have to be out there.
Yeah, but you said you don't hold customer funds, but don't you hold it briefly? The moment the funds are shifted, shapeshift, so to say?
It depends how you define custody, but essentially the moment a fund input has confirmed, the user has been sent their return transaction. So it could be argued that Shapeshift is holding the funds for a moment while the transaction's happening, in the same way that if you walked into a convenience store and you hand over your cash, the teller might hold on to it for 3 seconds before you have your goods and walk out of the store. So if you can trust Shapeshift for a second, then you're good. But there's not this sort of lingering requirement of trusting an institution with millions of dollars of held customer funds, which is how almost all financial institutions have had to work in the past, and which Gox proved is a fallible model.
What types of should I put this? What types of possible integrations for Shapeshift.io for other applications do you see that you haven't seen yet?
Well, it's meant to be very flexible. Essentially, just the easiest way to convert any digital asset into any other digital asset. So its use cases will grow as the use cases of digital assets grow. Right now, most digital assets are either Bitcoin or a bunch of altcoins. But more and more people are seeing sort of platform tokens that represent rights in IP, tokens that represent shares of equity, tokens that represent an item in a video game, tokens that represent a key to access something. So as that universe of tokens expands, the applications for Bitcoin and for Shapeshift and how it gets integrated will expand.
Is that clear, Tim?
Yeah, that's Good for me.
Good. And you're, I mean, you've been based in the past in Panama, right, Eric? Are you currently, because you said earlier that we need to be careful with disclosing where people are based. Can you say anything about where you're based right now, or do you prefer to keep that for yourself?
Yeah, I'm in Denver.
You're in Denver still.
I think most people know that.
I recognize the bear whale painting of last time.
Yeah, the bear whale painting is my inspiration every day.
Yeah.
For those listeners who don't know what this painting is behind me, this is the bear whale, and it was essentially a piece of artwork that Shapeshift commissioned after the great bear whale was dumping bitcoins on the market, I think in fall of last year. And it's very beautiful. It's essentially this big bear whale in the ocean and these Spartan-like soldiers attacking it. So the Spartans are meant to be Bitcoin, fighting off the cynicism of the world. And if you look very closely at the bear, you see that it has printed in its fur the little symbol of the Federal Reserve note, which is a nice little touch that the artist made, which I didn't even realize until I got the big print.
Great. So to answer my question, let me put this way: don't you think there's a security risk for you then, or for the company by being Denver?
Well, as opposed to what?
Being in some other jurisdiction like Switzerland, or I don't know, maybe more friendly jurisdiction.
Where a company is based is not nearly as important as where its customers are. So since the BitLicense was the first legislation that actually required by law certain provisions which Shapeshift was not comfortable with, we blocked New York. Now, it doesn't matter if Shapeshift was based in New York or was based in China. The New York Department of Financial Services will claim jurisdiction if even one customer is in that jurisdiction. So where someone's customers are is in some ways more important than where the business is based.
Okay.
And the concept of a business being based somewhere, I think, is very anachronistic and outdated now. I mean, especially in the Bitcoin world, a lot of these services are based on the internet. The proper jurisdiction for them to be, understood is as an entity on the internet.
Cloud company. Yeah.
A lot of companies don't have an office with a bunch of employees working at a fixed physical location, and their customers are not in that physical location. So trying to understand a business based on where that business is based starts to fall apart very quickly when you get into a lot of these digital currency companies. And I think that's an improvement.
All right.
So you, just to rewind a little bit back in history, before Shapeshift, etc., you invested, you worked for some other companies in the Bitcoin space. One of them was BitInstant, where you worked together, or where your colleague or partner was Charlie Shrem. Just out of curiosity, are you still in touch with him? I haven't heard much about him lately, so I was curious. Do you know how it's going?
I think he's doing pretty well. He has a really wonderful girlfriend who has been there for him throughout this whole ordeal, and she's sort of been his lifeline connection to the outside world, and she's helpful for communicating with Charlie and keeping him in touch with people. But I think he's the majority of the way through his caging right now, and when he's released, I'm sure it'll be a grand celebration for a lot of people. It'll be good to see someone who didn't harm anyone be released from sitting in a state cage.
Yeah, for the viewers at home, can you maybe tell the people a little bit about what happened to him and why he has been convicted?
Yeah. So I worked with him at an early Bitcoin company called BitInstant. And BitInstant was essentially a way to move money into exchanges quickly, because let's say the exchange is Mt. Gox, they're in Japan. To send a bank transfer there is going to take several days. And with the volatility of Bitcoin, that can be a serious problem if you're trying to get in at a certain point. So BitInstant essentially held money, fiat, at the exchanges. And back then it was pretty much only Gox. And then if you essentially brought cash to us, we would take your cash and then credit you instantly at Mt. Gox. So you could get money to Gox in an hour instead of 3 to 5 business days. So in any case, Charlie got in trouble because someone who was purchasing bitcoins through BitInstant was selling those bitcoins to people on Silk Road, which was the online drug market. And so apparently Charlie knew that this guy was selling some of these coins to people on Silk Road, and he got imprisoned essentially for selling an asset to someone who sold the asset to people who did something illegal online, and the illegal act they did online was buying drugs to put into their own body. So, and Charlie was imprisoned for 1 to 2 years based on that egregious act. And I think it woke a lot of people up to how unjust the legal system is in the U.S. It's not only bad enough that peaceful people who do things with their own body are imprisoned. Someone who sells coins to someone who sells coins to that person doing peaceful things with their own body is imprisoned. I don't think, properly understood, I don't think people in America support that at all. And the drug war, I think, is coming to an end here. I mean, I've lived in Colorado, and there are marijuana dispensaries all over the place. And when I was young, that was not the case. And I grew up in a world saying that marijuana was this terrible thing, and if you do it, your life's going to fall apart, and it has to be illegal to keep society safe. And then here we are, and I'm grown up, and I see it become legalized, and you can buy it as easily as walking in and buying some beer. And has society fallen apart? No. Are people running around in the streets, murdering each other because they're doped up on weed? No. It has brought peace and safety to an industry that was formerly in the black market. And anyone in Colorado who has seen this unfold, I think, sees the absurdity of the drug war and throwing peaceful people in cages for essentially acting on their own, liberty with their own body.
You guys are turning into Holland, Erik, yeah? Because we also this country has so far not disintegrated based on our drugs policy. So
yeah, and it's crazy that the same action, which if you do it on one side of this arbitrary line, on the Colorado side of the line, is legal and fine, sanctioned by the government. If you step over this arbitrary line and do the exact same activity, suddenly it is a criminal action and you can be thrown in jail for it. That should generally set off, a warning signal to any thinking person. Like, why is there that discrepancy? And hopefully people will slowly wake up to the fact that the drug war is immoral, unethical, extremely expensive, and ruining the lives of a lot of good people.
So in regards to warning signals, what do you think the message is that the people who have prosecuted Charlie Shrem are trying to send to the world? Is it something like don't do anything with Bitcoin, or I'm not really seeing the point there. What do you think?
It didn't really have anything to do with Bitcoin. If Charlie had sold bananas to someone who sold them to someone who used the bananas to make a trade on Silk Road, that would essentially be the same criminal act. The medium of exchange doesn't matter, and I don't think the prosecutors were doing anything but trying to make an example of someone, because they realized that the Silk Road was out there, that people were buying and selling drugs peacefully with each other, out of their control. It was yet one more example of how much of a terrible, expensive failure the drug war is, and they saw Charlie as an easy person to make an example of. And I think it kind of goes to show you the kind of people that a lot of these government types are, that they would throw a peaceful person in a cage just because they're doing something that they don't like that isn't hurting anyone.
Yeah. Well, that was maybe my point earlier also, maybe in a way, Erik, that Shapeshift, of course, can be seen in the future as a money transmitter or anything like that, and you would be seen as a person running it, being in the States. They would just demand jurisdiction and would possibly cage you as saying, look, Erik, your company made possible that illicit funds have traded or have been sent around the world, maybe even financing terrorism, something like that. Is that not a scenario you potentially afraid of?
Am I afraid of the government? Yeah, but I'm not going to live a life based on fear. I'm going to do what I think is right and productive. And you know, there's going to be a lot of interesting legal questions that cryptocurrencies bring to the forefront. Is Shapeshift a money transmitter? Under current law, it most definitely is not. It would be very difficult for a prosecutor to argue that, and we don't touch money whatsoever. We don't touch fiat, and we never will. And a lot of digital assets are going to be not even used as money in any way, shape, or form. So if government agencies start regulating blockchain assets as money, they are going to end up saying that the exchange of a Taylor Swift song for a World of Warcraft sword is a money transmission, because both of them are tokenized on the blockchain. It's going to be very absurd, and I welcome them to run into that absurdity in the courts.
Cool. Well, let's hope it will not come to that. Just a message to the audience, so you guys can also submit questions for Erik. So use this opportunity to ask Erik whatever you want to ask him. And also, of course, like this video and subscribe to our channel. Erik, let's talk a bit about R3 and Overstock. This week, there was positive news that SEC approved Overstock's issuance on the blockchain. But also at the same time, the CEO of Overstock, Patrick Byrne, warned about R3, this blockchain consortium that includes a lot of big banks. So could you comment on both news items?
Yeah, so they're somewhat unrelated. They involve the same person, but so R3 is essentially a consortium of banks and banking interests who are exploring blockchain technology, trying to figure out how to use it, either for clearance or settlement, or to make protocols for interbank blockchain use. Not a lot of details are available about it. And apparently, Overstock.com, which is very much getting involved into the cryptocurrency world, tried to join this consortium, and they denied Overstock, despite the fact that unarguably or irrefutably, Overstock is one of the experts in this field. They are one of the largest companies studying this. They've been one of the pioneers. They probably have some of the best experts on, a big corporate use of blockchains. So it'd be very interesting to know why they were rejected from this, but probably a lot of conspiracy theories abound. The cooler news is that the SEC blessed the request of Overstock to issue its own equity shares over the blockchain. So I think most people in the industry realize that you can essentially color coins as whatever you want. So a coin can represent a share of a company or a house or a contract or a Taylor Swift song, as I mentioned. And so Overstock has been wanting to issue some of its own equity, so shares in Overstock, which is a publicly traded company, over the blockchain, which means that if you held one of these shares, you'd actually be holding a blockchain token in some form of wallet. And this is
the Bitcoin blockchain, just to make sure that because blockchain is the words of the day, but we are talking about the Bitcoin blockchain in this case.
Yeah, I believe they're using the Bitcoin blockchain for this, but whichever blockchain is in use, the point is that the SEC has approved a request to issue a share as a blockchain token. So this is a really big, important move, and I think when the history of cryptocurrency development is being written, that is actually going to be a really big point to note. So it could be some number of months until it's actually done, but they have the approval from the overlords at this point. So once people realize that such shares could be traded over blockchains, I think that's going to cause an explosion in exploration of that activity. And there's no reason that many forms of value shouldn't be transferred over blockchains as opposed to sitting in a closed permissioned database somewhere, which is how it's all done right now.
Yeah, but then the identity question comes to mind, and we happen to have Tim on the show, who's an identity expert. But Are these shares going to be in someone's name, or how does that work out? Because I can imagine that would be a demand from the regulators to make sure that they can follow, based on KYC and all of these things, who owns what share at what time.
Well, the purpose and the reason everyone is in this habit of knowing who owns what share at what time is because until blockchains, you needed to know that information. You needed to know the person who owned a share. It had to be attested somehow. So they had to say, here's who I am, I own this share, and the actual holder of the shares, which is essentially just a database somewhere, has that all written down. That all changes if you have a blockchain doing it, because the owner of the share is simply the one who possesses that blockchain credit. So functionally, you don't need to know anything about the person at all, and the system can work very fluidly and efficiently without that. So it's a great achievement for privacy and for safety and security. Since the SEC doesn't really care about those things, I don't know that they'll allow this stuff to be done privately and safely, but it's a first step at least.
So could we maybe compare them to the old paper bonds, that we're going back to such sort of a system, like where you used to have the buttonwoods tree on Wall Street? People used to come together over there. That's pretty much a decentralized fashion of trading assets, right?
Yeah, it kind of harkens back to how stock trading used to be done, which was with essentially bearer notes, bearer slips, and whoever had the slip owned the share. And you didn't necessarily need your name to be in a database, because if you held that piece of paper, then you were assumed to own that share. There's obviously a tremendous problem with forgery, and if you lose a share, it gets lost in a house fire or something, it's gone. So there are lots of imperfect, and you can't very safely transfer 1,000 paper shares to someone very easily. So that system is very inefficient. But we moved instead to this sort of permissioned system where it was all recorded in databases and all your identity and personal information needed to be known. And now we move beyond that back to an actual custodial arrangement where you can possess the shares that you own yourself. And you get all the benefits of those old paper slips without the inefficiencies.
So when we look at the Bitcoin blockchain, we see electronic cash. These so-called paper bearer bonds in an electronic form also seem to return in an electronic form. But when we look at all the other types of payments that most people do every day with their credit or debit cards or PIN cards through PayPal, etc., that's all identity-based. So first of all, in regards to Bitcoin and decentralization, what are your thoughts on identity in general?
Well, first of all, the way that identity is done currently is terrible. So since I've been involved in the Bitcoin world, every time I have to sign something, whether it's a check or a contract, I realize how absurd it is to essentially scribble ink on this piece of paper, which somehow demonstrates who I am. But of course, it doesn't do that at all. It's just a silly ritual that people are used to. And in the world where people can have actual cryptographic signatures that prove mathematically that one person is who they say they are, that's an amazing human achievement. It's not been adopted widely yet, but I think it will be. And our children and grandchildren are going to think it's really funny that, back in the early 20th century, people were doing this kind of thing with scribbling on paper. So identity is going to be a really interesting concept going forward. I think what you'll have is identity systems that are so I possess my identity, which is essentially a set of information about who I am, whether it's like biometric information, how tall I am, and my eye color, and that kind of thing, my fingerprints, or my history, where I went to school, who my parents are, all these kind of things. There's thousands of individual pieces of information that make up my identity. And to demonstrate to a counterparty who I am, I shouldn't have to divulge all of that information to everyone. All I should need to do is sign something cryptographically that proves that what that person needs to know. So we're going to have a world where people are a lot safer and it can be a lot more private, and we won't have this silly problem of identity theft anymore. Of course, the caveat here is this assumes that regulators actually see the value of this, see the value of people being able to be private, which I don't think they do, and so it's going to require sort of a generational argument about the value of these things and how important it is in a free society.
So maybe thanks to mathematics, we won't even need identity as Bitcoin proves for electronic cash, or even when looking at overstock. Personally, I'm a bit more familiar with Counterparty, where you can also issue assets on the Bitcoin blockchain. Mm-hmm. So that's identity, but identity always intertwines with reputation. So what if we don't really need identity for payments for like electronic cash or the bearer assets that we can issue on the Bitcoin blockchain? Do we still need reputation? And do you think it's interesting for Bitcoin, for example, with something like the Bitcoin OTC Web of Trust, or maybe another possible application?
Well, reputation is important when trust is required. If you can remove the need for trust, then the need for reputation in some ways goes away. So when someone pays with cash, with physical dollar bills, there's no personal information or anything that goes along with it. When someone pays you $10 in cash, you don't care who they are or their reputation, because you know that instrument is valid, and as long as you possess it, then it's good. The reason people have to spew their personal information all over the place, which is attached to their reputation when it comes to electronic forms of payment, is that you do care who the person is who's sending you a bank transfer, largely because those things can be reversed, they can be messed with or distorted in various ways. So there's a certain element of trust. That's why you wouldn't just give your bank account number to someone on the street. And in a world like Bitcoin, where you don't have to trust people in order to make payments, that prevents you from having to also convey personal information and to convey the reputation. That doesn't mean that reputation is unimportant in every aspect of society. It just means that it's unimportant in the transfer of payments, which helps greatly for efficiency.
Right. Point taken.
Let's go to a question from the audience, Erik. The question is from Flush. He says, "Hi guys, great to see that you're interviewing Erik. Does he think the Bitcoin network will be a protocol for small and large payments like Visa, or more for high value transactions?"
Trying to predict the future of how Bitcoin will play out is problematic. I think the market finds a way. If blocks are too small, people will build augmented systems to handle small transactions, and if blocks are big enough, then people won't need those augmented systems. So who knows? But I think the important point is that cryptocurrency and blockchain systems will take over the world of payments for all types, small and large, from micro to very huge. And the specific way that plays out is probably unpredictable. But smart people are building these kind of systems, and wherever there's a roadblock, people, entrepreneurs figure out ways to overcome it. That's why having an open source and an open, inclusive system that anyone can build on is so powerful, and ultimately why an open platform like Bitcoin will always dominate a closed platform such as an interbank lending network where you have to be one of the banks to use it.
I really want to say I agree with you there, because if you look at Shapeshift, for example, it's like a micro intermediary on top of a disintermediating layer, like a base layer protocol. So there's a level playing field for everybody to compete against anybody else within the space, within the economy, or in the market. And I think that's very interesting, because from my perspective, that also has to do with reputation. Because Shapeshift.io doesn't hold my funds, but if they mess up several transactions, they could lose the reputation. So this way, you see that it's much more about reputation for companies who work on a micro-intermediary level, instead of when you cartelize and centralize all the revenues when you have a decentralized system, you also decentralize the revenue, so everybody becomes an equal player within such a system. Do you agree?
Yeah, and I think in some ways Shapeshift doesn't need to be trusted, so its reputation doesn't matter because it's not holding a bunch of money. But that's only for some ways. Like in other ways, our reputation is really important. So we spend a lot of time making sure our customer service is good, that the transactions process quickly, and these types of reputations keep people coming back to us. So there's lots of ways in which we still need to earn people's trust, but those are essentially earning people's trust in order to show them a good product, as opposed to earning people's trust in order to endanger them by collecting and holding all their money for an extended period of time.
Right.
We remove the need for trust in parts of the business which shouldn't have to have a trust element to them.
Right. So people can voluntarily choose to trust you if they believe you add enough value to the network for them, essentially.
Right, and the cost of losing trust is not devastating to customers.
Right.
If we breach trust, that probably means a few customers are upset at one transaction, as opposed to losing $300 million because the exchange disappears and blows up like Gox.
Right.
So Silverminer wants to know, Erik, do you have a position in Ethereum or Ether, just personally?
As in, like, do I own some?
Yeah, I guess that's what he wants to know.
I own some. Bitcoin is probably about 95% of my cryptocurrency holdings.
It used to be 99. It used to be 99, I think. So it's.
Yeah.
Do you align it with the dominance index on your market capitalization site?
Yeah. The vast majority of what I hold in digital assets is in Bitcoin, but I cheat a little bit because by owning Shapeshift, that is essentially a position on the universe of digital assets. So if we have a world where there's lots of valuable digital assets, Shapeshift will be valuable. So I don't feel the need as much to own a portfolio of lots of different assets, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you're hedged that way. One more question from Flush, and maybe then we can talk a little bit about what you expect for 2016 before we wrap up. Flush asks, do you think private ledgers have use for companies to be more efficient and or reduce costs, or will people always seek the most secure distributed ledger, the Bitcoin blockchain? So basically he's asking if there's a case for private change, I guess.
I'm sure there will be companies that successfully and efficiently use private chains for various things. I think blockchain technology can absolutely help with things like that. I also am quite sure that those systems can never become as widespread and powerful as a system like Bitcoin because it's open. So if efficiency of transactions is your goal for a specific use case, blockchains may not be the right tool. For other use cases, blockchains are going to be very powerful. So it really depends on which case you're talking about. But I think the lesson that people have learned over and over in the technology world should be that open platforms tend to outcompete closed platforms. And this was true with the internet itself was the biggest example of this, where you had, in the 90s, you had half a dozen or more of these sort of closed systems like CompuServe and AOL, which were very well funded, very powerful companies were building them, and they had all the lead at first. In the early 90s, AOL was how people used online services. And they failed because the openness of the internet allowed so many people around the world to build so much and experiment in so many interesting ways that there's no possibility for one company or one organization or one government, no matter how well funded, to ever compete with that kind of thing.
You want to chip in there, Tim?
Well, I like the analogy with the early internet. Another one I find interesting personally is the early PC market in the 1980s. If you compare these three, then in the first two instances you saw that in the end, price, speed, so performance, and reliability were the main factors that decided which ones would come out as winners. So it wouldn't surprise me if we could take these analogies when looking at the rise of the internet and the rise of the PCs for the PC market in the 1980s. That we could see a lot of similarities here. Of course, it's a totally different topic. Not everything is compatible in this scenario, but yeah, I do agree.
Yeah, the sort of VHS versus Betamax is also a good example of it, right? Where Betamax was this sort of proprietary closed system from a very powerful, well-funded company, Sony, and it's generally understood that that was the better technology from a technological point of view. But the openness of the VHS platform allowed so many more people to use it and build on it that it ended up becoming the standard.
Yeah, that's correct. Only at the same time, it's really difficult to build something open source and monetize it at the same time. And that's what I was pointing at earlier, that when you have a protocol that doesn't require any intermediaries, then it will all depend on the people who will actually add value to the network, to the users themselves. And those will be the winners, in I believe. And I'm not sure at this point if that's going to be Shapeshift. That's not what I'm saying here. But I do believe that Shapeshift is getting the point there.
Yeah, well, and I think key to a decentralized system and an open platform like Bitcoin is it's not that everything on the platform has to be free and open. It's that the base layer, the platform layer itself, needs to be free and open. And then people can build whatever they want on top of that. So if you want to build a closed exchange, that's fine. You can do that. And other people can try building other types of exchanges, and they can all compete with each other. The platform needs to be free and open, and then specific business models can, at the discretion of the owners, can try out different things and different models.
So what do you see as potential or like the most interesting business models or revenue streams for open source or companies that are based on open source software? Because that's what you see a lot in this space, either with the Bitcoin blockchain or private blockchains. Most of it is open source nowadays, so people do seem to realize that the openness, the transparency is really important, at least to some extent.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not an expert on open source software, but it's an industry which I think the world was very skeptical of, and has proven itself to be workable from a corporate business model perspective. So companies like Red Hat, I think, have shown that you can build open source software and still become a giant corporation making lots of money. It changes the way that people have to do business, but it doesn't prevent business from happening. And also I think it doesn't mean that all businesses need to be open source completely. Sometimes it makes a lot of sense, but it's just up to the company how they want to do that. And it's very clear that companies can be completely open source and make a lot of money, and so that's a really good model to aspire to.
Interesting link there to IBM is that they do seem to get the importance of blockchain, whether that's the Bitcoin blockchain or private blockchains. And when you look at IBM in the past, they have at some point stopped developing OS/2 in order to put those resources into the development of Linux, and they've had a lot of profit from doing this. So I do think that a lot of big companies out there are seeing this. The same thing goes for even for companies like Microsoft nowadays, who are open sourcing some parts of the software. So I do think that's a good path we're heading into. But I'm really curious to see what kind of business models people will come up with on top of open source software.
Yeah, and sometimes there's hybrid approaches. Like some of the things that we build at Shapeshift is open source, and some of it's not. So we decide, on a case-by-case basis. So often a company can create all sorts of open source software, and it can even be free or free services, and then also have other software that is, subscription or pay-to-use type thing, and they can work pretty well in harmony.
Yeah, makes sense. So Erik, we're almost at the end of the year. What are the two key things you're looking forward to in terms of Bitcoin for next year? Of course, we have the block reward that will be halved, if I'm not mistaken. So I guess that will be quite interesting to watch. We have an ongoing scalability discussion, and some solutions will be implemented. What are some of the things that you are looking into, or things that you think should be on the mind of investors?
I think that over the last year and a half or 2 years, all of the venture capital that has gone into various Bitcoin companies, um, that stuff takes a while to turn into actual products that consumers see and enjoy. And over the next year, I think a lot of those products are going to be coming to market. So very slick, polished, Bitcoin-based products were that were the big investments of the last couple of years are going to be visible. And those, if they've been done well, those will attract users and build the ecosystem. I'm very excited about the Lightning Network. It certainly has lots of potential, and if that gets done well and people can really do microtransactions essentially at no cost and in any number, that'll just blow out a whole bunch of interesting use cases that the world should probably get prepared for. I'm also really excited about Augur on Ethereum. I think that is also another one of those projects that is huge potential, and if they execute it well, that is really going to change the way the world works. Being able to price information in a distributed manner is a really important service that I think the world is poorer without. So, and that'll be, I believe, live 2016. So those are some of the things I'm keeping my eye out. We still have a secret project at Shapeshift that we will announce in Q1 that I think will be pretty impressive to people.
Together with the new website.
Yeah, it's not the new website, but it is the new website will help it.
Yeah. Okay, so, great. So lots of exciting things to look forward to. And do you care to give us a price target for end of 2016?
For end of the year 2016?
I'm not going to hold you to it, but
sure. End of year 2016, I think the price will be $1,700.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Erik. Tim, maybe final question from your side?
No, nothing in particular at this moment.
Cool. You want to add something, Erik?
No, I'm good. Thank you guys so much for having me on the show.
Yeah, it's a great tradition, and now every half year, it's the third time already. A year ago, I guess more or less, you were together with Roger there, and we had two as well, and then half a year ago we had with Tuur and Joop. So let's keep on doing it every half year, and so we get to know more, and we learn more about everything at Shapeshift and all the amazing products that you work on. So
awesome.
Keep on doing the good work and keep on spreading the good word, and let's do it again.
All right, thanks so much, guys.
Merry Christmas, of course, and Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year.
Okay,
Merry Christmas.
See ya.
See ya. Bye.